Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. That, of course, means some smart talk radio is in your future. This segment, one that is, it's extremely common, more common every day, and that is, how are we going to survive and thrive in step-family relationships? What works and what doesn't? We're going to be talking to an expert in that subject. Patricia Papernow, she's a nationally recognized expert on step-families, couples and blended family systems, parenting, and much more. She provides training and consultations throughout the United States, and since '81, she's been in private practice focusing on clinical supervision and individual and couple therapy with adults. It is a deep subject, a broad one indeed. Dr. Papernow, how are you, my friend?
I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're very happy to be here with you. Wow, this time of year, holiday time in particular, can stir all kinds of emotions. Let's do this before we dive into the subject. Specifically, give our listeners a little bit more background about you, your practice, and why in particular this subject is so important to you.
Well, I got started 35 years ago. Actually, it's probably more now, because I needed a dissertation, and I was living in a step family. This was my first marriage. My stepkids were a little bit older, and things seemed to be a little bit better in the family, not just as the kids were older. So I did my dissertation on stages of development in step families, normal stages of development. That became my first book, and I got hooked. And I have been fascinated ever since. I'm now in my almost 2 decades in my second step family, now with a daughter of my own. And it is just fascinating and also so important, You're right. 1 out of 2 of us live in a step relationship at one point in our lives. And we know a lot about what works, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about how to make this work that can be quite misleading.
Do you think that the whole concept of divorce, blended families, whatever term we want to use, is it more prominent from what you've seen in America versus around the world, or are we pretty much the same with everyone else?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that question. I do know that the rates of divorce were quite high in the 80s. The rates of divorce and marriage have both dropped a bit in the United States. Rates of cohabitation without marriage are much higher in Europe and in other countries. So we may not have statistics for divorce, but people are, of course, uncoupling and recoupling all the time.
Any particular reason? I know you get asked this a lot, but let's just start with a base question. Why is divorce so prevalent here?
Why is it so prevalent? Well, that's an interesting question. I think when we choose our first mate, we're choosing out of what we know. And sometimes we don't choose all that well. And the dilemma is when we have kids involved, and we need to divorce in a way that protects kids. Because it turns out that prediction of well-being for kids doesn't depend on divorce or step parents and step families or single-parent families. Actually, what makes the most difference is the level of conflict and the quality of parenting. And that's something actually rather stunning that I found in the research as I was looking at the research for this second book. Very, very clear that it's family process of parenting and conflict that really, really matters for kids. And very hard things to manage well, actually.
Doctor, I'm curious as to, is there such a thing, do you have, from your studies, you're talking about the quality of parenting regardless. Are there 2 or 3 main headlines in terms of what these qualities are, or do they vary from family to family?
No, there really are. Every family is different, but we really have very clear research that the best parenting for kids is called authoritative parenting. It is warm and attuned and empathic, and it also sets moderately firm, developmentally appropriate demands for maturity, and there's some consistent follow-through on that. Authoritarian parenting, that's firm and clear but not warm, is not so good for kids. Permissive parenting, oh, honey, whatever you do is fine with me, that's not so good for kids. Nor is unpredictable parenting. One moment I'm here and the next minute I'm really mad at you. So it's called authoritative parenting, and it's pretty clear across cultures and across all family structures.
So would it be loosely defined as sort of love with boundaries?
Well put, exactly. And here's the thing, in a step family, which is my area of expertise, oftentimes parenting has slipped a little bit. Single parents tend to be a tiny bit more permissive, and step parents are more likely to want more boundaries, more irritated by kids' behavior. So parents and step parents often become somewhat polarized. The step parent says your kids are a brat. The parent says my kids are normal. What kids need is authoritative parenting, but it's the parent who has to stay the disciplinarian. The step parent needs to take time to get to know the kids.
Your area, as you said, is divorce and blended and non-traditional families, we'll say. But let's talk about the traditional or non-traditional, either, all of them together. Is it fair to say that baby boomers, and we'll just use this just for this discussion, as a whole, overly helicopter, so to speak, their kids?
That's an interesting question, because there is a very interesting body of research started by a woman who was looking at what we call helicopter parents in college. You know what she found? She was stunned. There is a small percentage of very overly involved parents whose kids are not doing well. However, and those parents are crazy. They're a little off their rockers. However, generally, put that little slice aside, the more connection parents had with their kids, the better kids were doing. They had better grades, better friendships, better relationships with their professors. They did better out of college. She was stunned. It's not what she expected to find. And I think what explains it is secure attachment, that sense that I can rely on you and I know you're there, actually helps kids feel more confident and be more capable and in their lives. Very interesting research.
We are talking to Patricia Papernow, and she is a nationally recognized expert on step families, couples in general, and blended families. She's been doing this for quite a while, is recognized across the country for her work, and we're talking about a brand new piece of research she's done. Well, it's a book, but it's also heavily research-based. Surviving and Thriving in Step Family Relationships, What Works and What Doesn't. What, as you, again, you work with so many families in so many situations, what is the primary mistake, in your opinion, that let's just take this as an example, a newly married couple, each bringing children to the relationship, what's a mistake maybe that they make right out of the box?
Well, I think the mistake comes out of the adults are thrilled. If you've been a single parent for a long time, or you've been alone, or you in a bad marriage, you are thrilled to have found somebody new. However, what's kind of stunning, especially with that language of blending, is that for many kids, the adjustment to a step family is actually harder and takes longer than the adjustment to divorce. So adults are thrilled. Kids experience the entry of a step parent often as a loss. And the expectation that kids will be as thrilled as we are gets dashed pretty quickly usually. Not always. There are a few kids who come along pretty easily. So to come in expecting blending, it's some pretty big surprises. And then the other piece is that, well, there are two things. I call them blogger boo-boos. They're sort of ideas that seem to make sense. One of them is put the couple first and everything will be fine. And that's somewhat true in a first-time family. In a step family, the more close, very intimate step couples actually have poorer well-being in the kids, and we think that's because kids need their parents in this major transition. So the guideline is both and, not either or. Time alone for the parent and child, time alone for the step couple. And then the other major boo-boo is the totally well-meaning advice to make a new slate of rules and the parent backs the step parent up. It makes sense, right? But as the pace of change goes up, child well-being goes down. So that means the adults have to take their time, and the parent has to remain the disciplinarian until the step-parent has developed a caring, trusting relationship with the kids. And that can be a couple of years, especially for adolescents.
So it's many times the kids actually look at the step-parent almost like a child from a, quote, regular family would look at a substitute teacher. This is the chance to either maybe take advantage of a situation or complain or act differently as a result.
Well, actually, I think the adults often see the child as manipulative and taking advantage. Children are struggling. Here's what I say to adults. Imagine you are single and your best friend has a new boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're having lunch with them, and they are googling and gagaing at each other. And how do you feel? You feel like chopped meat. And do you really want to watch them hold hands or kiss? You don't. So besides which, and now imagine that you're a child, and the person who is googling at this other stranger is your parent, and you need him or her, and you've already been through a bunch of losses, and this new person is changing the food we eat, it has different smells, has louder voice, or is more upset when I leave a mess. That's hard for kids. So a lot of what looks like misbehavior in kids is not kids taking advantage. It's kids struggling. And it's helpful for the grown-ups to know that. It's less like a substitute teacher because there isn't there is a level of loss, but there isn't the history of loss and the sense of really losing somebody that you really, really, really need as a kid needs a parent.
I would think there would also be part of this is, fair or not, the child inherently is going to blame the step-parent for the breakup of the original set of parents. Is that fair?
That does happen sometimes. It doesn't happen always, but it does happen sometimes. Sometimes the ex-spouse blames the step-parent who had nothing to do with the breakup.
All right, so let's take it from the angle now, the single parent that is getting ready to wed, wife or husband, and they are coming into a new situation. Help them with some advice.
Well, the first thing I would say is, Dan Gottlieb just gave me a lovely quote. This is a slow cooker, not a microwave. You're excited. Enjoy your new partner. However, expect that your kids are going to need to take things a step at a time. The adults are going to want to move much more quickly than the kids. So take things a step at a time. And spend a lot of one-to-one time. If it works well in the whole family, great. Most likely it will work well for one kid, medium well for another, and not well for the third. Expect that will happen. And don't pressure kids. Give them time. And 2 or 3 changes at a time, and concentrate on safety and civility first, which means if you've both got kids, there may be some differences. One kid's allowed, my daughter had to eat grape nuts for breakfast, which my husband's kids thought was a form of cardboard, and he agreed. They were allowed to eat sugar cereal. So my kid still had to eat her grape nuts, and she was upset about it.
Right.
So the rule was that, the sugar cereal kids couldn't flaunt it, and she could have some sugar cereal when she was finished with her grape nuts.
All right. What about, here's another angle. You are, whether you are remarried or not, you are an ex, and how do you now describe your feelings or describe to your kids how they should act towards daddy's new wife or mommy's new husband? What advice do you give to the ex?
Well, depends on the ex, but sometimes it can be surprisingly difficult and painful when your ex-partner recouples, even if you're the one who left. It sometimes can really rattle your bones. And what I say to ex-spouses is a couple of things. First of all, your feelings are totally understandable, and I know you love your kids, and I know you want the best for your kids. What will be best for your kids is if you can say to them, you have a mom and a stepmom, and teenagers, I always say, you probably already know this, you have a mom and a stepmom. Your mom, me, I will always have a permanent place in your heart, and your stepmom will have a different place in your heart. Your heart's big. There's room for both. And no matter what, I will be your mom, and I hope you get to know her over time. And the other is to protect your kid from, you may be really furious at your ex-husband for all kinds of things, and it's easy to leak. Parents who sometimes say, I'm protecting my kids from conflict, the kids say, Mom says, well, your dad, ... or your mom, ... Protect your child from conflict and tension. Watch what I call leaking. Try not to say nasty things about your ex, even if they're true, because it's a little like pouring sulfuric acid into your kid, and I know you don't want that.
What about, do you, based on the research that you've done and so much work that you've done with couples, do you feel that as a society, this divorce rate is something that we should be working to turn around, or are we willing to say, you know what, it is what it is? Or C, is there a new theory that maybe, you know what, we're not destined to be with just one person? Where do you fall on that sort of continuum?
Well, that's a tough one. I think the divorce rate is actually falling, so that's a good thing. Most people that I know don't divorce very easily. There is an idea that divorce is, people do it easily. I haven't seen anybody who did it easily. And then the most important thing really is, it's not divorce that makes lower well-being in kids, it's conflict. And kids whose parents divorced 10 years earlier where there was no conflict, those kids are doing better than kids in a first-time, never divorced, their parents never divorced, but they're in high conflict. Especially young adult girls do very, very poorly with high conflict adults. So I personally am more concerned about what's the level of conflict and what's the quality of the relationship between the parent and child. Are you spending time with your kid? Are you able to really empathize with where your kid is? Are you able to set some moderately firm limits and really follow them through, really get to know your kid who's different from who you are? Those things actually matter more to child well-being. So I don't like it when people divorce, and I will certainly do what I can to help people connect if they're committed to it. But if they're going to divorce, I'm going to help them do it well. Do it while we protect the kids as much as possible and treat each other as decently as possible, because you're in it for life if you've got kids, whether you like it or not. I'll tell you where the rates of marriage and divorce and remarriage are going up. It's in baby boomers and older, over 50. Rates of divorce, marriage, and re-divorce are going up. In all the rest of the population, those things are going down a little.
So what does that tell you?
I think that, baby boomers are feeling their oats and wanting something different, and sometimes it's the woman who leaves, sometimes it's the man. What's very interesting for kids is I just had a whole slew of consultations where a guy, 50, 55, 60, recoupled, and his daughters fell apart. And they were all relationships, interestingly, where the father-daughter relationship was a bit compromised to start with. There was not quite a really solid connection, and then dad remarries, and the girls fall apart. One of them didn't fall apart until the dad was remarried for 8 years, and his new wife got pregnant with the second child. At that point, she fell apart. Very interesting. I could come up with a bunch of theories, but I'm not sure I understand it fully.
Well, it is a subject that is a deep one, and you know what, as talented as you are, if you had the single answer, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be a billionaire, right?
You're exactly right.
Well, maybe you are.
And I wouldn't have stayed in it for 35, 40 years.
Well, our guest has been Dr. Patricia Papernow, and she is one of America's leading experts on divorce. She's one of America's leading experts on blended families and the dynamics of that. It is a long, involved subject that, boy, you get new research every day, don't you?
Yeah. When I wrote the second book, I went back to look at the research in 20 years since my first book. For my dissertation 20 years ago, you have to do a literature review. There was nothing to read. It was a cinch. 20 years later, the rich trove, it's fascinating.
Well, the book is published by Routledge, and the work is called Surviving and Thriving in Step-Family Relationships, What Works and What Doesn't. How can people find out more about this gigantic subject, and specifically, how can they get a copy of the book?
You know, the easiest way to get a copy of the book is to go on Amazon and Google my last name, which is Papernow plus Surviving and Thriving, and it'll bring you to it. Or go to my website, which is drpatriciapapernow.com, and you can also get there from there.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. I'm sure that your research will not stop, unfortunately, for quite a while. But we do appreciate your time, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. I'm glad to have a chance to share all of this with people who can use the information.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.